Lincoln County 911, what is the location of your emergency? Okay, ma'am. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, I need you to take a couple deep breaths so I can see what's going on. What is the address where you need us to come?
My name is Russell Faria.
Russell, what's going on there?
I just got home from a friend's house, and my wife killed herself. She's on the floor.
Okay, Russell, I need you to calm down, honey, okay? I need you to calm down, take a couple deep breaths. We're going to get somebody on the way there, okay?
This was a call placed to 911 by Russ Faria after discovering his wife on the living room sofa. She had deep cuts on her wrists and a kitchen knife was sticking out of her neck. In this video, we're going to discover what led to the death of Betsy Faria. To say this case is twisted is an understatement. It's so insane that it could be made into a TV show. Oh wait, it already has. More on that later. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Get your feet up and grab a wee cup of tea, because now we're about to have a look at the twisted lies of Pamela Hupp. Early 19th century Scottish author Sir Walter Scott famously said, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive." We would do well to bear that in mind during this video. So let's start at the beginning then. Born on October 10th, 1958, Pamela Newman grew up in Delwood, Missouri. Being raised in the Catholic faith, she had 4 other siblings. Her mother was a school teacher and her dad, he worked at Union Electric. She had a reasonably normal childhood. She was fairly popular in high school and had a good circle of friends. It was at high school that she would meet her boyfriend there, and soon after senior prom they decided to get hitched. A short time after getting married, they would have a baby daughter together. The marriage would last for 6 years and ultimately end in divorce. Not long after her marriage and subsequent divorce was done, she met and married another guy, Mark Hupp. They would add a wee boy to the family and lived in Florida for a short time. In 2001, the Hupps and the 2 kids moved back to Missouri to a wee place there called O'Fallon, where they would get into the flipping business, house flipping. It was there that Pam would get a clerical job at State Farm, and one of the first people that she would meet there was Betsy Faria. Although she was a decade younger than Pam, the pair got along well and became friends. Whilst working at State Farm, Pam's boss would say that she was a good employee. She was always the first one through the door in the morning, therefore he would have a wee bit of time to have a wee chat and a chinwag and get to know her a bit better. He would later say that she had very good insights, human nature wise. She was a positive person, very level headed. He would go on to say that he never saw her get mad at anything, and she was very adept at office politics. Her boss though would also go on to say there were a few things that didn't quite add up. She would often allude to saying that she worked with or for the FBI, maybe a secret squirrel type of situation, or maybe she was in witness protection. In any case, after she would make these vague comments, she would often be heard saying things like, "Ooh, I've said too much." Pam and Betsy drifted apart and lost touch over the years. That was until January of 2010 when sadly Betsy was diagnosed with breast cancer. Then Pam was right there, by her side every step of the way to help in any way that she could. Pamela integrated herself into Betsy's life, to the point where it was a wee bit strange, maybe even a bit overbearing, but hey, she was just doing the lassie a good turn. She was there to help her, you know. Around about this time, Betsy's dad had said to her, "You know, maybe you should start thinking about the future, financially. Maybe get something sorted, like a will, and you know, stuff to provide for your daughters after you're gone." Betsy had concerns with this. Because her daughters were just young teenagers, they were not old enough yet to be the beneficiaries of any life insurance, and she had told her dad that she was also worried that her husband Russ would piss it away. That left one other person that made sense: Pamela Hupp. Pamela was trustworthy, she was sensible, and lately had been a great help in supporting Betsy. It only made sense that she would be the recipient of the life insurance when the time inevitably came. However, this in itself wouldn't be without its own conditions. The money was never going to be Pam's, it was just to be held until her daughters were old enough to receive the money that was owed to them. Betsy's dad would later say that about a month after the conversation about making Pamela the beneficiary, Betsy had asked him to come to one of her treatments at the cancer treatment ward so they could talk about it and spend some quality time together. But when he got there, Pamela was sitting there. She arrived unannounced and made it awkward, so Betsy and her dad couldn't really talk about stuff. That type of behaviour would happen often when it came to Pam being overbearing. Then, Betsy would get the news that she was beating the cancer. In celebration of this, her and Russ would book a cruise together, and they would call it a celebration of life cruise. They would set sail in November of 2011 and would invite only close family and friends. Pamela Hupp was not invited. The month prior to the cruise taking place, the farriers had gotten the bad news that the cancer had actually spread to her liver. But she decided to take the cruise and enjoy every last bit of it. Russ even arranged for her to go and swim with the dolphins, which had always been a dream of hers. When they returned from the cruise, Pam was waiting and would spend almost every day with Betsy. On December 23rd, she and Betsy would go together to the library in Winghaven, and whilst there, Betsy would ask the librarian to bear witness to a signature on an official document. The document was a change of beneficiary form which removed Russ and made Pamela Hupp the sole beneficiary. On Tuesday the 27th of December, Betsy would text Pamela to tell her not to bother joining her for chemotherapy. She had explained in the text message that she was going with an old friend and really wanted to chat and have some one-on-one time with them. Besides that, Tuesday nights were normally Russ's games night with his pals. They would get together every week and play games or watch movies. Russ and Betsy had already agreed that he would pick her up from her mum's house once she was finished with her treatments and he was finished with his games night. But Pamela would show up anyway, claiming that she never received the text. Betsy's friend would later say that Betsy was quite surprised when Pamela suddenly showed up at the hospital. After Betsy's treatment was done, she would go to her mum's house as planned and spend some time there. After relaxing there and having dinner with her mum, her husband Russ was going to come and collect her to take her home. Meanwhile, Pamela drove herself back home to O'Fallon to have a quick dinner with her husband, and then she would drive back to Betsy's mum's house and insist that she would take Betsy back home to Troy. At around 7 p.m. that night, Pamela dropped Betsy off at her house. Before doing so, she called her husband on the phone to tell him that she was just dropping Betsy off in Troy. She then insisted that Betsy speak to him to wish him a Merry Christmas, which she did and then said goodbye. Pam then returned home to O'Fallon. Russ worked in IT. Oftentimes he would work from home. Tuesday the 27th of December was no exception. He would finish work around 5 p.m. and then phone Betsy. He was planning on swinging past his own mother's house after his game night, but he would call his mum at 5:22 just to say that he probably wouldn't be across tonight because he had promised Betsy that he would pick up some dog food before going to get her. At 5:56 he stopped by a convenience store in Lake St. Louis where he would buy 2 bottles of Snapple. Russ and his other friends would meet at Mike Corbin's place around 6 p.m. that night. They chilled out, shooting the shit, and watched a wee movie. At 9 p.m, Russ would leave his friends and would later say that he stopped at an Arby's and bought 2 junior melts which he ate on the 25-mile drive back to Troy. Once he walked into the house and took off his jacket, he would enter the living room and see his wife there laying on the couch.
Is she breathing at all?
No.
She is not breathing? Okay. Russell, is there anybody that we can call for you? Okay, and you're for sure she's not breathing right now?
No, you did.
Okay.
He would go on to later tell police that when he first saw Betsy laying there, that he thought that she was just sick. Only after taking stock of the scene and kneeling beside her did he realise that she wasn't sick at all. His wife was dead. She had knife wounds to her wrists, and he could see the black handle of a kitchen knife sticking out of her neck. See, Betsy had tried to kill herself before by cutting her own wrists, so Russ told police that he just assumed that this was a successful attempt this time. The first responders found Betsy to be cold to the touch. The blood was coagulated on her scalp and had already dried on her wrists. The fire captain and the EMS supervisor was also in attendance, and both of them concluded that Betsy had died more than an hour earlier. Further inspection revealed that her wrists had not just been slashed, the knife was driven all the way to the bone. It had sliced into her skull, plunged into her left eye, and lacerated her throat, which severed the right carotid artery. Looking at the image of the scene, how on earth did Russ initially think that this was suicide? It looks like a horror movie in there. Russ's 911 call was strange. Investigators would say that it was ludicrous. Although most of the stab wounds to her body were covered up by loose clothing, so that may not have been obvious at the time. Betsy had been stabbed 55 times. Her lungs, her liver, her spleen had all been punctured. A search of the property turned up a pair of slippers belonging to Russ, which had been thrown to the back of his closet and were covered in blood. The first officer on scene was Lincoln County Sheriff's Deputy Chris Hollingsworth. He noted that Russ was clearly upset, yet had limited tears coming from his eyes. What kind of statement is that? Where else did tears come from? He also reported that Faria appeared to be in a state of panic and had difficulty talking and breathing. Once sat inside the police cruiser, Hollingsworth was able to talk to Russ. He said that he tried to distract him by talking about the neighbourhood and stuff. He said that they chatted normally for a while, and Russ even laughed a few times, which the deputy thought was suspicious. Investigators also reported that during 10 hours of interviews at the police station, Russ held himself together and continually repeated, "I wasn't there. I didn't kill her."
I am being honest.
You're not being honest. You're not. It doesn't make sense. Nothing makes sense. This whole thing does not make sense. The only person that can make it make sense is you. You got home, you got in a fight, you pulled a knife and you stabbed your wife multiple times and killed her.
No, I did not kill my wife.
Because she was dying of cancer already. You could have waited. If you were in it for the money, all you had to, time was on your side. All you had to do was wait.
I did not kill my wife.
The next afternoon, Russ was administered a polygraph test, which he subsequently failed. It was not looking good for Russ. Police would get Pamela Hupp in to have a wee chat about things. Pam would go on to tell the cops that Betsy had a plan for her and Russ to move to Lake St. Louis to be closer to the hospital, her mum and the tennis club. She also said that Betsy was nervous about telling Russ because he would be quote-unquote furious. Pam said on that fateful night that she had felt guilty about leaving Betsy alone to face Russ because he had a violent temper. Hupp also encouraged the cops to go into Betsy's laptop and look for a specific email in which she expressed fear that Russ was going to kill her. So did Betsy tell Russ her plans? Did he snap and kill his wife? It was really not looking good for Russ. On January 4th, Russ was officially charged for the murder of his wife. Pamela Hupp was cooperating fully with the police investigation. She would be keen to supply her DNA, fingerprints and anything else that they needed. She told the police that on the evening Betsy was killed, she had dropped her off at 7 p.m, then driven home. She watched some TV with her husband, showered and went to bed. Pam emphasised how she was worried about Betsy, even when she dropped her off, because the house looked dark and the doors were unlocked. She found it strange because a silver Nissan Maxima was parked in the drive, indicating that Russ was home already. Russ Faria's trial began on November 18, 2013. His defence attorney, Joel Schwartz, argued that the testimonies of the 4 friends he had visited, cell phone records evidencing his presence at his friend's house 20 miles away from the murder scene, and evidence of him making purchases from different stores over the course of the evening demonstrated that the timeline did not allow for him to commit this murder. There were no traces of blood on his body or clothes. The prosecuting attorney countered this by saying that Russ Faria's friends were providing a false alibi and had conspired with him to perpetrate this murder, including holding on to his cell phone and posing as him to buy food at Arby's to falsify his whereabouts. On November 21st, 2013, Russ Faria was convicted on both counts. A month later, he was sentenced to life plus 30 years without the possibility of parole and sent to the Jefferson City Correctional Centre. One of the strange things about this case, and trust me, there are many, although the prosecution's main argument was that obviously all of his friends were in on it, well, they were never prosecuted. or charged for anything. In fact, the friends didn't even know that the prosecutor had implicated them until they heard about it in the media. The sentence was welcomed by Betsy Farria's family. In an interview given following the sentencing, her sister Julie made claims unheard during the trial that Russ Faria had been angered by the removal of his name from a separate life insurance policy, and that he had on one occasion held a pillow on Betsy's face and said, "This is what it feels like to die." So that's it. Russ murdered his wife brutally, and it was all for money. Justice had been served, and the killer is in prison. Oh, people. We've not even started yet. We're not even close to the level of craziness in this story. Buckle up, because we're diving right into madness. The trial judge that presided over Russ's trial, well, he would refuse his lawyer to present evidence to the court. Evidence that would implicate one of the witnesses in the trial, Pamela Hupp. Cell phone records would later show that Hupp was at Betsy's house for over 30 minutes longer than she originally stated. Russ's violent temper, that was implanted with the cops and the prosecution by Hupp, as was the shite story about him holding a pillow over Betsy's face and saying what he said. Never happened. That email that was found on Betsy's computer, turns out it wasn't an email, it was just a document. A document that was written on Word 97, software that was not even installed on Betsy's laptop. Remember that Hupp was pretty keen for the cops to find that. Hupp claimed that she had put $100,000 of the insurance money into an account for Betsy's daughters. In February of 2014, the newspaper reported that Hupp had kept 150 grand rather than put any of it into a trust for Faria's daughters. She had also contradicted herself during police interviews, such as initially claiming that she had not entered the Faria house after driving Betsy home, but later revising this account twice. The 911 operator who had taken Russ Faria's original call believed that he had been genuinely shocked and upset. An article alleged that the prosecutor had been in a relationship with the then captain of investigations for the sheriff's office and one of the investigating officers in the Betsy Faria murder case, as well as a prosecution witness. Two members of the jury in Russ Faria's trial informed the media that this information had been withheld from them. In February of 2015, Russ Faria's retrial began. This time around, his lawyers were allowed to introduce the evidence that they had that implicated Pamela Hupp. A CSI agent who had examined the crime scene testified that she believed the slippers found in Russ's closet had not gotten bloodied by stepping in blood. During the trial, police officers disclosed that Hupp, who was not called to testify this time, had claimed in interviews conducted in June that she and Betsy had been in a sexual relationship. On November 7th, 2015, Faria's conviction was overturned and he was released from prison after having served almost 4 years.
I want to play the 911 call for you because I think the public should hear this. When I heard this 2 hours after it was made, or recorded I should say, it just didn't sound right to me, and I thought we had something unusual on our hands. So, Linda, go ahead, please.
911, what's your emergency? Hey, hello, there's someone breaking in my house. Help! What's the address you're at? Help!
Woman, can you woman get your wife?
I'm getting in the car with you. No,
What's the address?
Get out, get out, get out. Help!
What's the address you're at?
Help! Help!
Why is somebody breaking in?
No! No!
Hello?
Help! Help!
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Help!
We cut the recording off right there because in the next second, you could hear 5 gunshots ring out in succession. By her own admission to the officers who arrived at the scene just a few minutes after this, she discharged her weapon until she had, quote, no more bullets. Now, her story was that she had been running some errands and she was going back out to her car to run some more errands, and a silver car pulled up. A gentleman jumped out of the car and jumped in her front seat with a knife. She said there was a struggle that ensued. She was able to knock the knife out of this guy's hand. She jumped out of her car. She runs through her garage while he pursued her. And then she further said she was able to get inside the home, get inside her bedroom, and barricade herself while the suspect followed her inside. That's what you heard right there. We came to find out that that was a lie. That never happened that way. Now, it happened, but it was scripted. There were several things that came about that really caused us, and when I say us, I mean them first and then us later as we reviewed everything, to question immediately this story. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
A man called Louis Gumpenberger had forced his way into the SUV she was driving into her driveway. He held a knife to her throat and demanded Russie's money. Terrified for her life, and in a moment of adrenaline and sheer ninja reflexes, she was able to strike the knife out of his hand and run into her home via the garage. But he wasn't done. He was in quick pursuit of her. With only moments to think, the brave Pamela Hupp was able to get to her bedroom. Did she barricade herself in there and call 911? Hell no! She was too awesome for that. She retrieved her .38 revolver from her nightstand, and as the madman ran at her down the hallway, she fired multiple times, killing the intruder. $900 was found on his body, along with a note bearing instructions to kidnap Hupp, get Russie's money from Hupp at her bank and kill Hupp, and to take Hupp back to the house and get rid of her. Make it look like Russie's wife. Make sure the knife sticks out of her neck. In return, you'll get a reward of $10,000. So who was this man? Louis Gumpenberger was involved in a near-fatal car crash back in 2005. He smashed his skull against the steel of the car, and as a result it rendered him with disabilities. He was unable to process complex thoughts, and by all accounts now had the mind of a child. He was 33 years old and lived with his mother, a home that he would only leave for very short walks in his neighbourhood of St. Charles. He walked with a limp, and his left hand was useless.
I just want to find out what's going on with all these people coming at me. And I hit his arm with the knife and then shot out of the car and ran inside. He goes, "Bitch, we're going to the bank, we're getting Russ's money." And he started getting all agitated and excited. He was getting all excited and he was, I thought he was drunk or on drugs or something like that. And I just started shooting and walking towards him because I wanted to be sure I hit him. Because everybody kept saying that's a little gun and blah, 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 and I gotta reclose. So once that door opened and he was there, I just started shooting and walking towards him until I didn't have any more.
Police would later discover that 45 minutes before Louis entering Pam's SUV, her mobile phone had pinged in the neighbourhood of St. Charles. Imagine that, eh? What are the chances? Nah, what really happened was that Pamela Hupp had spoken to Louis Gumpenberger and introduced herself as a producer for Dateline NBC and offered to pay him to reenact a 911 scenario for the show. She brought him back to her house, set the scene, told him what to say, then she actually called the real 911, produced her real gun and gunned him down. But why? Well, she was planning on framing Russ Faria with this murder also. A piece of evidence that broke this case was that 6 days prior to Pam's 911 call and killing of Gumpenberger, a woman in St. Charles County filed a police report. See, a blonde woman had approached her on the street, identifying herself as a Dateline producer. She wanted to hire this woman to be part of a 911 reenactment for the show. The woman initially agreed to it, but then started getting a wee bit suspicious because she didn't seem like an official producer. For Dateline, she had no business cards or anything. The woman quickly got out of the SUV saying, "Nah, I've changed my mind." Footage taken from the area that this took place clearly showed Pam's grey 2016 GMC Acadia with the license plate clearly visible. The day after the shooting, Pam's husband took a garbage bag from the house and put it into the SUV. In the bag was a last will and testament of Shirley Newman, Pamela's mother, Betsy Faria's death certificate, full transcripts of Hupp's police interviews, and yellow sticky notes with the bank account details of several relatives. So there's also a few other details before we crack on. What else? Oh yeah, so remember the $900 that was found on Gumpenberger? Well, the strange thing about that was that all 9 $100 bills had sequential serial numbers. The 10th $100 bill, well, that was discovered in a dresser drawer in Hupp's house, and the serial numbers matched. On the 23rd of August 2016, Pamela Hupp was charged with first-degree murder and criminal action. Roughly about an hour after her arrest, whilst in a police interview room, this happened. You can see her trying to be smooth here, sliding the pen across the table. Maybe she's planning to write a letter, maybe. I don't know. She has a wee feel at her neck. That's around where the jugular vein is. Oh, hang on. Yep, I know what's going to happen here. Yeah, so basically, she went to the bathroom and took the pen to the side of her neck and then punctured her wrists. She survived though. On the 16th of December, a grand jury indicted her of the charges. On January 31st, 2017, she appeared in court and pleaded not guilty. The prosecutors openly came out and said that they would be seeking the death penalty in this case. In May of 2018, a judge ruled that prosecutors could not present evidence relating to the death of Shirley Newman, Pam's mother. But why would they say such a thing? Shirley Newman, Hupp's mother, a widow since 2000, was living alone in a third-floor apartment in the Lakeview Park Independent Senior Living Community in Fenton. She was suffering from dementia and arthritis. She spent the night of October 29th in 2013 with Pamela following a hospital visit. At approximately 5 PM on October 30th, Hupp dropped Newman off at her apartment, instructing staff not to expect her for dinner that evening or breakfast the following day. A housekeeper found Newman dead beneath the balcony of her home at 2:30 PM the next day. The aluminium balcony railing was broken. Following a police investigation, assistant medical examiners concluded that she had died from blunt force trauma to the chest resulting from an accidental fall. An autopsy found that she had 0.84 micrograms of the sedative zolpidem in her blood, which is over 8 times the expected concentration for someone having taken a normal dose. The next month, the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office received an anonymous note suggesting that Hupp, the last person known to have seen Newman alive, had murdered her mother for the life insurance. Hupp and her siblings each received approximately $120,000 of investments held by Newman, as well as sharing a $10,000 life insurance payout. Earlier that year, prior to her mother's death, Hupp had been videotaped saying, "My mom's worth $500,000 that I get when she dies. If I really wanted money, there was an easier way than trying to combat somebody that's physically stronger than me." So far though, although she's clearly suspected in her mother's death, the case remains closed. Pamela's husband divorced her just a few months ago in March. Oh yeah, and NBC have made a mini-series about all of these shenanigans starring Renée Zellweger as Pam Hupp. It's called The Thing About Pam. That's a wrap on the video, folks. Thank you yet again for giving me your precious time. I appreciate every one of you. Stay safe out there, and as always, keep smiling.